Well, how do you talk about something as broad as how did we get to the 6-lane policy without going through a bunch of history? So I'm going to have to bore you with a bunch of history. But I think it's important history for you guys that have not been involved in the process since 1995 so that you understand really how we got this policy. It began with our plan, Metro 2020, which was adopted in 1995. The reason that's important, that was the first transportation plan that was developed after the passage of ICE-T, which was the federal legislation that replaced the interstate program. It was a new and different kind of transportation planning for the United States. One of the things that was very key to that was this issue that Susan had mentioned, early and meaningful public involvement. And it wasn't that we didn't do public involvement before, but it kind of flipped it to where it said you need to put more emphasis on getting public involvement in the process at the start. And one of the questions was, well, how do you get people involved with long-range transportation planning? It's not a project that's going to be built in front of their house tomorrow. It's something that's 25 years away. How do you get people involved? But also, as a result of that, there were some really key regional and transportation development policies that were born out of that process, and that came as part of Metro 2020. We're going to kind of hit on them, but it was all because of that broad-based public involvement. How do we do that? With the formation of a new process internally within MetroPlan that created at that time it was called ATTAC, which is now you guys, the RPAC. We said that was one of the keys. We need to get people involved that have interest in transportation planning, are stakeholders in the process, but also the general public that had not been involved. So our process changed. The board created the ATTAC, the RPAC, to get that early, meaningful public involvement. So you're a result of that process. One of the first things we did was we commissioned a video. Jim actually did the video and describing what that federal legislation did, how it changed the process in terms of transportation planning, and how we wanted the public to get involved. And that was shown and distributed among the jurisdictions on local public access, all in the effort to try to get people engaged, volunteer for this very committee, and be involved in the process overall. We also did radio and TV spots to encourage that process even before the committee was formed. But also to do and participate in what was determined to be a visual preference survey. Now, we're going to kind of have to go back into those visual preference surveys. Why did we do that, and what does that mean? And we got lambasted because it wasn't a scientific survey. It wasn't supposed to be a scientific survey. And when you are trying to get people engaged in a long-range transportation planning process that never understood it, that never had any concept of what you're talking about, the VPS was in a way of saying, okay, basically, what do we as citizens want in terms of transportation within our area? That was basically what it did. And it gave people a chance to look at images and just say, is this appropriate for our region or is this not appropriate? That's really what it did. It had happened over a 3-month period, November to January. We went over 35 different public meetings, and we had over 900 people actually take that survey and actually score those 240 photographic images. And many of you may still remember that, and we're going to look at a short video clip kind of talking about that. But when they were looking at those images, they actually scored them individually from a -10 to a +10, just to give a range of saying, I really hate this image, a -10. I don't think it's appropriate for our region. I don't think this kind of thing is appropriate for, Little Rock, Placer County, the region, or all the way into a +10. We absolutely love this. After that was done, there was a consultants actually kind of went through and we summarized and scored all those things, and then we came up with 3 thematic categories that those images were filtered through. Rural, small city, suburban, mid-size, and urban and large. And we summarized those to come up with kind of themes that would characterize those areas, and we'll kind of get them to it a little bit later. But it was also followed up with questionnaires. I mean, it wasn't just a visual. They actually had a chance to respond to questions, asking them about specific things. We also did focus groups prior to this all starting to say, okay, we were going to test this and see how people reacted to it before we even did it. So we did a focus group. When that was all done and the summary of it, we had paid for a 225,000 copy newspaper insert into the Sunday Democrat Gazette at that time to actually give people a chance to see what the visual results of that were and actually comment on that process. After doing that, the consultants came back and kind of consolidated it and kind of gave an express vision what they thought based on that results of what the area was saying they wanted for these different categories. And I'm going to kind of break it right here because I want y'all to see this short clip of this. But this is just kind of summarizing, again, what the categories would be in terms of those themes.
Now, why do we do it? We call the process that we are involved with what we call a vision plan. And we're really believing that you have to have a vision before you really start to plan. Rather than starting to plan without a vision, you start planning first with a vision in mind. Now, why do we do that? Well, because this whole question of planning, that is planning for the future, preparing for the future, understanding what we have now and preparing for the future is a very complicated issue. And the public does not always understand that, but they really want to participate in it because it is their community. It is their region, and so therefore the vision planning process was a way in which you could get people involved easily in the planning process. We believe that a community has the right to determine its physical character. I mean, you people live here. Not only you live here, your parents perhaps live here, and your children live here, and your children's children, and your children's children's children will live here. And so it's very important that you have that right to determine its physical character, and that just should not be left to engineering standards. It should be left to the people who have to actually live in it. We firmly believe that planners cannot do these credible jobs unless they first understand what people think, and thus the preference surveys. Here's what's negative and positive. The one on the left, of course, went extremely negative. This is North Little Rock. And, you know, it's got some of the remaining urban fabric there. It's got some indentations, but it's really pathetic. The sidewalks are badly maintained. And it gives people a negative feeling about the place. People drive through it and they get a negative feeling about the place. And you have said it. You've scored it negative. It gives you a bad feeling about it. And my guess is a bad feeling means it's unsafe, it's unhealthy, you don't want to be there. But when you look at it, you can see the image on the right. What it wants to have is some of the characters of the image on the right. The image on the left, on the other hand, you see, has got all that negative space in it. No, there's nothing there. And it really kind of wants to have what happened there in Hot Springs. And I understand the things in Hot Springs are relatively new, but you can start to see the banners and the new trees and the street lighting has really given that street a phenomenally interesting and vital kind of a character. And that's the kind of character that these kind of places kind of want to have. The question is, how do you get the economic resources to make it happen, and how do you have the market make it happen? But really key to this, we think, is the first thing to say that this is acceptable images, this is what you folks...
He went through and actually talked about each one of those categories and gave a summary of large city, small city, and rural area. And when we get back up on the screen, I'm going to let you just kind of read through those. I'm not going to read them to you. Just to give you an idea of really what that vision collectively said. And the reason I wanted to play that video clip was because when he was going through that presentation for large cities and he showed that image of North Little Rock, and when he used the word pathetic for North Little Rock, literally you could have heard that whole room just went, the air was just sucked out. It was because nobody could believe that one, he had the gall to call something here pathetic, and yet that very word, was something that had galvanized the community of North Little Rock to in fact do something about Argenta Main Street. And now, good or bad, it was all with the idea of what is our vision for the region. That vision if you'll look and read through these visions, and you can go back and look, they nailed it. And I say they, I mean the collective vision of people nailed it pretty good as to what they really wanted to see within the region. And if you'll really look at these things, you'll actually see that that's what's come about in the last 20 years in the very areas we're talking about. That was for large city, suburban areas, mixed use, parking lots being confined to the rear of the buildings. Some of these things you'll see, in fact, beginning to occur in these regions. Same thing with the rural and small city. But the thing was that it helped create a vision. And that's really what we were asking the general public is, what is the vision that you want for this region? It wasn't the issue of what transportation you want. It was what do you want to, as a vision to be. I'm looking at Charles here because he was on that committee. This vision that came out of Metro 2020, which we're still operating under today in Imagine Central Arkansas, took months of wordsmithing to actually get to. I mean, that committee beat every word of this vision, knowing that it was going to mean something, and they wanted to pursue that vision. And the thing that I really want to highlight a couple of things was this plan significantly changed how we are presently allowing our transportation systems and our communities to develop by defining an intermodal transportation system that, and then those three. But that last one establishes a strong link between the provision of transportation facilities and how we use our land. That was critical to really that vision, because we took that group and said, okay, it's not an issue of transportation versus land use or land use versus transportation. It's both of those, and they've got to work together. That vision, they said, we want to put that language in that vision. Now, having said that, that's a great vision, but how do you implement that vision? How do you tie those things and impact those very things that were called out? One of the first things that we did was to adopt roadway cross-sections. Roadway cross-sections, for you who don't know, you typically take a road, you cut it in like a piece of cake, and you say, okay, this is what this road is going to look like. We are going to have 2 lanes, 3 lanes. It's going to be this wide, and it's going to have these elements on it. We did that for all the roads in Central Arkansas. And the reason that's tied to this plan was, one, they wanted to set that link between land use and transportation, but it was also the issue that we're dealing with a long-range transportation plan that deals with 20 to 25 years. Actually, the cities and the local jurisdictions in their master street plans have adopted cross-sections for their master street plans, but there's no time frame on those master street plans. They're just not timed. So to implement a master street plan for a city may take 40, 50, 100 years. And in those typical cross-sections for the cities, because of the right-of-way that was needed for roadways, typically had, for principals, arterials, freeways, had 100, 200, 300 feet. And those typical cross-sections already had 3 lanes. Their ultimate cross-sections were 3 lanes. We took that and said, okay, then that's what the local jurisdictions are getting their dedicated right-of-way for. When somebody comes in to develop, they actually get the dedication of right-of-way. They're actually building a system to accommodate up to 3 lanes on principal arterials. We said, okay, then let's take that and we'll use that as our basis to say that is the ultimate that the local jurisdictions are going for. And let's accommodate them, pedestrians and bicycles, making roads safer, and to match that vision with the goals. When those cross-sections were adopted, they had sidewalks as a critical part of that. It wasn't that sidewalks came later, and it was all because of those adopted roadway cross-sections. So that was the first time in the plan that a road cross-section was adopted and to help tie land use and transportation together. There was also some other components with the roadways that had access management as a part of it, and there was an issue of policy of the issue with continuous center turn lanes that was adopted at that time also. But that's where the first concept of quote, three travel lanes in each direction, 6 became the operating norm for our policies. But tied with that, after the committee actually went through that process and understood that you couldn't have one or the other, they adopted specific land use recommendations. And again, it says recommendations because Metro Plan does not have land use control policy. Only the cities do. The state does not. Only the cities have land use control policies, and or the county. We did, and the committee adopted specific land use recommendations to implement that vision. And we'll talk about how we've been trying to encourage every one of these things to be followed as the processes that we've gone through to implement the plan. But there were 12 of those. Part of the issue is tying regional policy with local policy in terms of the mass street plans, in terms of their zoning and their land use. The other issue is trying to tie our vision for transportation on a regional basis beyond that. It was trying to hit both of those at the same time and yet create a mechanism in which that vision could be implemented. Having said that, that road cross-section with those typical cross-sections for freeways and principal arterials was adopted. But we never used the term in terms of six-lane policy. That was not really enumerated or listed in the document itself. But Metro 2025, which was adopted 5 years later, did explicitly say it. But Metro 2025 actually built on Metro 2020 because Metro 2020 had done some really incredible things in terms of changing how we develop in this metropolitan region. The vision and goals were reaffirmed, but we also in Metro 2025 actually put objectives under those regional goals and vision, so we actually embedded objectives. And it's because it took us 5 years to actually get down into real detailed objectives of how we could in fact implement those goals. The land use recommendations were carried over, and then for the first time the bicycle elements were actually added. It wasn't that we did not try to do bicycle elements before, we just ran out of time and effort, and so it was really the 2025 that actually got the full-blown bike element in place. As part of Metro 2025, and they didn't try to clarify this issue with tying land use, transportation, and our funding issues together, we recommended and designated a 682-mile regional arterial network. In Metro 2020, if you look at the plan, it says clearly we don't have enough money to maintain what we currently have on the ground and build all these expansive roadways. You can't have it both. This was the issue of saying, okay, let's try to target those resources a little bit more efficiently into a more limited system and to focus it on a regional arterial network. But that's when the language was actually reinforced. The six main travel lane maximum cross section for freeways, parkways, and principal arterials was included and expanded, and that is reflected in that text. But that's where the first time that language really kind of breaking it out and saying this was critical to tying this land use, transportation, and these policies together was with the regional arterial network. But Metro 2025 also then expanded into other modes. That was when we first said, okay, we've targeted it in terms of transportation, in terms of roads and maintenance and all those issues. Let's look at the other modes that we're trying to elevate by that vision. So that's when we got into some of the issues with the rail studies, because in Metro 2020, 5 years earlier, every community we went to in this metropolitan area, and when I say every community, I literally mean every community from Traskwood, Haskell, all the way up to Austin Ward, every community, small, large, it didn't matter. Every community asked us for one thing in Metro 2020, and it was could they use the rails to commute to Little Rock? Now we were stunned by that. It just blew us away that even small cities, towns would be asking that. Having said that, in Metro 2025, we said, okay, then how can we try to address that issue? And that's when we got into some issue with some of the rail studies, which corridors would be more appropriate for rail or BRT or whatever at some point. Then we got in the issue with the new downtown bus transfer center, completion of local bicycle plans, because until then, none of the cities had bicycle plans, none of them. And then we got Little Rock and North Little Rock and Conway start working on theirs, and then we actually did an inventory of pedestrian network. One of the things about Metro 2025 and Metro 2020 and the adoption of the sidewalk policy is that we would not use any of our federal funds to build a roadway cross-section that did not have those sidewalks on it. And so what that forced, and we're talking about tying these things together, was the issue. the locals had abandoned the policy of building sidewalks in subdivision. That's why in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, you go in your subdivisions in the region, there are no sidewalks. The cities had abandoned requiring the dedication of sidewalks and building of sidewalks. This policy actually triggered the cities to go back and reinstitute that policy in their subdivision regulations, because we wouldn't fund any, we wouldn't use federal dollars to fund sidewalks if they were not going to build sidewalks themselves. That's where that policy came from. Again, tying transportation and land use together. Why are sidewalks important? Because if you don't have sidewalks, you can't build a transit system, because you can't walk to the transit system. It wasn't roadways, it wasn't transit, it was all balancing this stuff. The other thing that came out of Metro 2020, other than the issue with rail commuting, was they asked this question. NAFTA had just been passed. There was so much increased rail traffic in the metropolitan area, and people in every community going northeast, southwest are bisected by rail, and Conway obviously the other way. But because of the increased rail traffic, everybody was complaining about they can't get across the rail network here. It's causing too much delay. Well, as a result of the public comment, that's when the committee actually, we went through this whole process of looking at rail grade, and I think there was 300 and something at-grade crossings in the metropolitan area, and we actually went through a process of evaluating those and recommending 12 sites to build rail grade separated areas in projects within that. And the board agreed. I mean, it came out of this committee. The board agreed with that, and we said that we would build 12 by 2020. We were on target to do that. We have 2 left, and they're supposed to be in the next TIP cycle. We're on target to accomplish what we said we were going to do. It all came out as a result of that early and meaningful public involvement. These are those 12 grade separations, and the only one that was, one of the original ones that we said we were going to do, Springer Cabela Boulevard, we canceled because there was changing rail traffic, and in fact the community said they didn't want it anymore. So that was the only one, and we're on target for that. Funding. Metro 2020 updated the funding. We, again, because of the regional arterial network, we changed our funding processes here to target trying to impact that network and to focus on that system. So we split, MetroPlan split our funds at that time. We kept 70% regionally, and we gave 30% to the local jurisdictions to actually help them build some of their projects that they thought were priority. Tying everything together, trying to create and implement that vision. It was hitting the categories and changed it. That public comment, we actually went out for 30 days. It actually was extended to 60. The copies of that draft went to private and public organizations. A long list of citizens. We maintain a list of citizens and organizations that we routinely mail out to, like for the Metro Trends. At that time, that summary, we did 225,000 insert last time. We did a 10,000 copy distribution of this one, and we actually literally, staff went out and actually placed it in cafes and restaurants and in stores and tried to hit the minority community, specifically libraries, everything that we could try to get that out. Besides our routine legal advertisements and committees and presenting to all the organizations in terms of requests from Rotary or whoever else. But again, you'll see long-range transportation. I mean, when we were presenting, we had 190 attend. Long-range transportation is hard for people to understand when you're talking about projects that are 2025. But you'll see over the next planned period, those numbers keep going up. And it's because you're building that expectation of what people want and express. Metro 2025, when we were talking about public comment, one of the things that we talked about and Susan talked about was responding to. But I'm just going to read this one because when you think, okay, some people don't really get the concept of regional arterial network and what that was proposed to do, but then we get a specific comment. I definitely like the idea of developing a regional network of quality transportation corridors. So some people were in fact beginning to get engaged and realize the significance of what we were doing and trying to make comment on that. Then came Metro 2030, next 5 years, adopted in 2005. An evolving process from the previous 2 plans. It did retain the policies and plan implementation actions, but also sets forth some new directions, which I'll kind of go over. And then some new policies incorporated strategies that framed the planning and transformation direction, not just for the plan horizon, which is our 20 to 25, but went beyond that 25-year horizon. For the first time, we got to thinking beyond just the 20-year period. And so that was the first time we did that. As you'll see in this next public involvement process, we began to, and because of the committee, every time on one of these plan updates, we come to this committee and say, what do you guys want to do in terms of public involvement? And how do you want to try to expand it, engage it differently than we did previously? Well, as you see, all of a sudden the process begins to expand and the public involvement begins to expand. So we have major forums for this plan that were scheduled. I'm going to kind of highlight in where those actually occurred. You'll see the number is increasing of the events, and also in terms of what we're asked. So it gets a little bit more detailed every plan period of what we're asking people, how we're going to engage them, where it's occurring. Like Susan said, we're much more engaged in going out to where they're at. But then back down to the 6-lane policy. The question was, did we ever ask the public specifically, what do you think about this? Well, we asked this, and it says, to what degree do you support the plan's key strategies? Build freeway systems of 6 lanes supported by robust arterial system. Optimize the efficiency of existing original arterial network before investing in substantial capacity improvements. So we specifically asked those questions. And it wasn't a case where nobody knew, it was hidden. These were constantly being asked, not only in terms of questionnaires, but in presentations of what people thought about those. Never getting any really negative, and most of the comments were very supportive. I borrowed this from our current Imagine Central Arkansas because the icon really says what we described in Metro 2020, but it really was a balanced approach to mobility. And it was with the issue of freeway system at 6 lanes, meeting additional capacity beyond that through that balanced transportation system. That was stated explicitly in Metro 2030 this way. Build a freeway system to 6 lanes region-wide and meet demand above that with a robust regional arterial network and with public transit. I want to highlight that it says region-wide because one of the policies about that 6-lane issue was because of freight, because of safety, the committee recommended that that 6-lane policy was be applied region-wide, and that's why the widenings of the freeways to Conway, to Benton, to now to Jacksonville and to Cabot were all done within the plan's vision of saying, yes, we realize that those needed to be done, not just because that the capacity needed to be, but because of safety and because of the freight issue. And so the committee was, and everybody was fully on board that that needed to take place. So there was no aversion to, I reckon, what I'm saying is in terms of widening freeways or widening roads. That was not the issue. It was tying these issues together of when they are appropriate to do so. Also, the transit vision was to double the size of the existing transit service in the short term and add fixed guideway, whether it was BRT or rail or whatever, in the long term. But it was the plan for Metro 2030 was to make sure that the existing bus system is working efficiently and up to date. And to squeeze as much capacity out of the existing RAN, out of the existing roads, get as much as we can out of intersection improvement, signal coordination, and access management before we start widening those roads. And it wasn't because we didn't need to widen them, we didn't have the money to widen them. Because again, every one of these plans says explicitly, we don't have enough money to maintain what we currently have on the ground. But we've chosen to take some resources and widen, and yet still do these other things. The other thing was to improve freight movement through intermodal connections, freeway widening, and again, that's why everybody was okay with the freeway widenings in the areas because of freight. Rail grade separations was one of those key decisions of why, and was tied to freight. and then providing non-freeway alternatives to the local traffic on the regional arterial network. And then to integrate pedestrian and bicycle facilities into new roadways and roadway improvements. Again, that was to make sure that we weren't going to abandon the sidewalk issue, but to try to address the broader issue of bicycle safety on the roadways and pedestrian safety on crossing the roadways. Then we come up with Metro 2032. Every 5 years, okay, what's different with Metro 2032? Well, Metro 2032 was 0.2 because if you'll remember, they kept kicking the federal legislation down the road. They just kept kicking it. So there really wasn't a lot of new things that were required federally of the plan. So we made some minor revisions to it, and we updated some new elements, and we created some new elements, like transportation health for the first time. In fact, trying to get into the issue of because of the committee, because of public comments saying it was important for air quality issues and things, and if we tie transportation to health, safety, being able to cross the roadways. So those policies and guidelines in Metro 2030 were put out for public comment. Again, they were retained in toto and remained valid for 2030. One thing that 2030.2 did was we had to do financial constraint for the first time, meaning we actually had to demonstrate for the first time that we had enough money to build what we said we were going to, and it had to be by project year of expenditure. So that was the really new thing for Metro 2032, was providing that financial constraint evaluation. In Metro 2032, again in 2010, that language that is adopted in Metro 2025, the metropolitan freeway system should be built to 6 through lanes, is the board's intent that demand over that capacity be met with a robust regional arterial network and public transit. Explicitly stated again, what you'll see in Metro 2032 then is okay, what do we do if there's a need to do something different? That's when this language got added. And it basically says, and this is really what's happening with the I-30 crossing, is if there's a need to go beyond 6 lanes, then there needs to be some studies done and documenting that there's a need for that, everybody agreeing that if that's needed, and then reserving the right that the board could conduct its own independent study. But it basically set the framework operating under for the I-30 crossing, and that's really what's happening. So again, specific language, comments, everybody, no negative comments on those things. Then we get into Imagine Central Arkansas, our new current plan, adopted last year, 2014. Entirely new plan in that it was an emphasis on sustainability for the first time. We didn't get into sustainability issues before. It wasn't in the broader context of trying literally to tie all these things together in a very unique way. And so, again, based on the same vision and the principles through the 4 previous plans, one thing that the ICA did was, I can't think of a more expansive public involvement process than we've had through ICA. I mean, because you guys actually asked us to do so many more things than we had ever done before. It was the most vetted plan in our history. I'm just going to quickly go through these, but that public outreach, we, for the first time at y'all's request, we tried to get into the younger people. We went to East End, we went to boys and girls clubs, we went to anybody that would hear us. But it was because the RPAC said, we're building this plan, we're building this system for these people, not us, we'll be dead and gone, but for these people, they're going to be here and we're building this system for them. Let's see what they say. That was a first for us to go to that level of effort, trying to get the involvement of the youth. But also, for the first time, obviously with the Latinos and the minorities, trying to reach them in much greater detail. We used, like Susan said, we used everything from the whiteboards, which everybody loved, all the way to every social media. But again, if you remember earlier, like the 190 that attended, but just in terms of people that actually trafficked on the websites, 1,800, 400, in the thousands, really, for each one of those pages, that in each one of those decision processes. We had, almost 3,000 at the project website alone. We had hometown visits. We actually went out, 1,270 that actually attended those. So the level of participation has increased dramatically over this process. And it was, and I think it was because, again, trying those new techniques, but people beginning to understand that they're seeing a system and a region differently than previously. And so they've got invested in this process. Again, just kind of summarizing that, and you can look at that. But questions about that process, and I want to end on this. I sat down and just thought, imagine this, and for you guys that have been here, imagine if Metro 2020 had never been adopted. In my opinion, this was what would be the results. We would have no rail grade separations in this metropolitan area. Not that there weren't some before, there wouldn't be any new ones. No Big Dam Bridge, no Two Rivers Bridge, no Arkansas River Trail System, no Jimerson Creek Bridge, no White Oak Bayou Bridge, no river rail trawling, a reduced river market district, greatly reduced sidewalk coverage, no pedestrian bridges downtown, no bicycle lanes, no bike routes, no bike racks on buses, a less than newer Rock Region bus fleet, no first short or long-term transit plan for Rock Region, no median divided roadways in the metropolitan area. There was only one prior to Metro 2020. It was Mallwell Boulevard. Since then, we have Dave Ward Drive, Military, Alcoa, and Reynolds Road. No roundabouts. You'd have reduced residential development downtown. No revitalized Argenta district. No access managed roadways. That's all come about as a result of Metro 2020 being adopted. And I say that those were things that I could honestly say that either Metro Plan in terms of either directly funded or was directly involved in getting changed. And I'm saying Metro Plan wasn't the sole player in this. This was everybody in grabbing that vision. And when Tony Nelson said pathetic to downtown North Little Rock, it galvanized people to say, we don't have to accept this anymore. Without Metro 2020, this metropolitan area would look dramatically different because of what you guys did. That this committee had the vision to push where nobody was willing to push before. The committee did that very thing. Now, we've asked, and people have asked us all the time in every one of these plan processes, how are we to know the plan's going to get implemented? And my answer is always the same. Unless you keep our elected officials' feet to the fire, that vision will never go anywhere. The biblical verse says, without a vision, the people perish. Well, I thank goodness that in fact this committee set forth a vision that the general public really demanded at Metro 2020. The rail grade separations, the other things that came about, wasn't because the committee sat down and thought of these ideas. It was because of what that early meaningful public involvement put on the table, and this committee and our board saying, yeah, we think they're right, and we're wanting to go with it. So the 6-lane policy was never it was never to be a one-all do-all. It was right the opposite. It was the issue of saying, recognizing that you do have limited resources. You have so much money to do so many things. But the committee and the public involvement that we got was we wanted to create a balanced system, and we wanted to create more choices for the metropolitan area. The one thing that came crystal clear through Magistrate Arkansas this time, if you'll remember, the thing that people valued most about living here was the parks, the open space, the way that we've developed, that we still have and maintain. I had one of the internationals tell me the other day, he said, it's like living in a park here. He said, I've never seen so many trees. You know, and it really is. I mean, that's really what people said they value. And tying land use and transportation together was key to that. And 6-lane policy was something that all it was saying, let's look at this and look at it from a holistic point of view and don't trade one for the other.